Hello, sweet doves. So, if you've been following today's media, you've probably seen all the hoopla on Harry Styles' Vogue cover shoot in the last couple days. If you don't know who Harry Styles is, he's most known for being in One Direction. He's also now a muse for Gucci and is known for performing in colorful suits during his 2018 solo tour. Now, I never really listened to One Direction, but did girls at your school also ask you who your favorite member was enough times that you just memorized the name of the cutest one in the group? But this month, Harry has stirred quite a lot of controversy. I hesitate to use the word controversy because I don't know if it's considered a controversy if the only people who are angry are
conservative people.
But he was the first solo man to be on the US Vogue's cover, and he's photographed wearing a dress and blowing up a balloon. Harry Styles is quoted to say, "When you take away, there's clothes for men and there's clothes for women. Once you remove any barriers, obviously you open up the arena in which you can play. It's like anything. Anytime you're putting barriers up in your own life, you're just limiting yourself." So I completely agree, and for today's video, I thought it'd be interesting and relevant to dive into the history of gendered clothing. I'm only going to cover like a small segment of it. I feel like I'm going to end up making this more into a series just because there's a lot of substance when it comes to gender and clothing, and I just don't have the time to cover all of it in one video. Okay, so let's start in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, men wore a chiton, I believe it's pronounced, which is that loose, flowy garment made of wool or linen that we see depicted in Greek statues. It was also commonly belted. One of the reasons why the Greeks didn't like pants was because they associated pant wearing with barbarism. Many of the groups surrounding the Greeks were wearing them, such as the Scythians, the Persians, and the Amazons. These groups were nomadic horse-riding peoples, so most historians agree that the reason pants came about was because horse-riding people needed some kind of garment to protect their legs from chafing. The Greeks are a bit of a misnomer. They did go on horseback as well sometimes, but Xenophon, an Athenian philosopher, advised against pants in his horsemanship manual. Even Alexander the Great, who adopted some Persian styles, never adopted pants, most likely due to the long-standing cultural belief that pants were effeminate. Yes, you heard me. The Greeks thought pants were too effeminate. This is because they believed barbarian women invented trousers to begin with. And, if a woman invented it, then it's definitely unsuitable for real Greek men. One legend claimed that trousers and long sleeves were first introduced by Medea, the mythic sorceress princess. Strabo of Pontus, a Greek historian from the 1st century, preserved ancient folklore that Medea wore trousers and a tunic. According to legend, Medea's garb was so suitable for archers and horse riders that the Medes and the Persians ended up adopting her style. The historian Hellenikos from the 5th century BCE preserves another legend, which depicts the Assyrian or Persian queen Atassa. She was raised as a boy by her father, and when she inherited the kingdom, she created a new kind of gender-neutral dress, long-sleeve shirts and trousers. Of course, there were a medley of reasons why the Greeks didn't like pants. Some historians theorize that it was because they just weren't into the bifurcated top and bottoms. The Greeks were much more into layering. Other historians say that the Greeks didn't like wearing pants because they found that pants were inhibiting natural functions. But there is no doubt that the Greeks were very disturbed by the fact that in many of these pants-wearing cultures, both men and women were wearing pants. Because that implied that men and women had the same roles in society, which,
is horrific.
Eventually, the Roman Empire took over the Greeks. The Roman Empire was another proponent of the anti-pants movement. However, as the Roman Empire expanded into northern territories, they ended up adopting pants because of the cold climate. I just want to point out that both ancient Greece and the Roman Empire covered huge amounts of territory, so even though the general consensus was no pants, that's not to say that no one in these civilizations was wearing pants. Though it's worth noting that in 397 CE, brother emperors Honorius and Arcadius enforced a trousers ban where anyone caught wearing pants would be exiled. Eventually, though, the practicality of pants won, the Roman Empire fell, and pants started to become more associated with menswear, and skirts and dresses with women's wear. Why is that the case? My best guess is that the Romans adopted pants first as military garb, so that kind of enforced masculinization of pants. Let's fast forward to the 19th century. In the 1850s, Elizabeth Smith Miller and Amelia Bloomer grew tired of the caged crinoline in fashion at the time. I mean, who could really blame them? These two women championed a type of pants called bloomers, also called Turkish trousers among some groups, that were mostly worn underneath skirts. Amelia Bloomer encouraged other women to wear them so they could participate in healthy outdoor activities like biking and hiking. Obviously, in contrast, the caged crinoline inhibited a lot of free movement, and women could not participate in outdoor activities wearing one. But unfortunately, society shamed and blamed any woman who wanted to participate in the bloomer trend, and the trend never really took off except for in biking. Fast forwarding again to the 20th century, as I mentioned briefly before in my Queen's Gambit video, more and more women started to adopt pants in the 1940s because they were taking over men's jobs on the home front during World War II. Skirts and dresses were just not suitable uniforms. That's not to say that women were not wearing pants beforehand. Katharine Hepburn and Marlene Dietrich scandalously wore pants in the 1930s. In the early 20th century, pants were considered okay for occasional dressing only. Obviously, movie stars and celebrities faced way less repercussions than ordinary women for adopting pants into their everyday wardrobe. Women could be fined or sent to jail for wearing pants under inappropriate circumstances. For instance, in 1939, in Los Angeles, a woman was actually sent to jail for showing up in the courtroom wearing pants. The judge cited that it was a distraction from legal businesses at hand. It's just a complete 180 when we look at how the Greeks didn't want to wear pants because they were considered feminine, and then how women were not allowed to wear pants in the early 20th century because they were considered masculine. It's almost as if misogyny has plagued women for thousands of years. By the 1960s, pants had basically become gender neutral, though a few antiquated laws stayed in place for longer. It wasn't until 1993 that women could wear pants on the US Senate floor, and not until 2013 that France finally got rid of a law that said that women needed permission to dress like a man to work or ride bicycles or horses. While obviously the law had not been enforced for like a century, it's still pretty effed up that it was still there in writing for so long. Children's clothing is also a very good indicator of changing gender values in society. Now, the whole gender shifting with pants spanned thousands of years if we're going to consider the ancient Greeks and Romans. In comparison, children's clothing only started becoming more gendered starting in the late 19th century. Nowadays, it feels like gendered clothing is forced upon children since infancy with shirts like these. No comment. Interestingly, despite all the severe gender oppression that occurred in previous centuries, parents were actually more progressive when it came to dressing their babies. All infants, regardless of gender, wore long gowns. Starting in the 16th century, we see a tradition called breeching, aka giving a boy his first pair of pants. This breeching age was around 7 or 8 years old up until the 19th century when it went down to 4 or 5 years old. Breeching was about boys growing into men, and I would argue that in this time period, pants were more associated with men than dresses were associated with women. Obviously, that's now changed, which is why women can wear pants pretty freely, but men will get cyberbullied by Candace Owens for wearing dresses. Some people will make clickbait articles where they'll say, oh, boys used to wear dresses, as if to imply that boys used to wear girls' clothing. But this is an oversimplification and actually pretty false because people back then didn't view infant dresses as girls' clothing. Unlike today, parents were uncomfortable with gendering their babies, and they much preferred to view them as like asexual cherubs, as they should. For the 19th century, baby dresses were predominantly white. This is because of new inventions in bleaching and the fact that muslin cotton could be bought inexpensively. White clothing was practical because it could be aggressively and frequently laundered without fading, and also there was some concern that the dyes in colored clothing could be potentially harmful to children. Pastel colors were often used as gender-neutral accent colors, but even when colors started to become segregated by gender, there was a lot of confusion and differing opinions when it came to deciding which color went with which gender. For instance, in the 1890 Ladies' Home Journal, blue is designated for girls while pink is for boys. In Little Women, which was written in 1880, Alcott writes that Amy put on a blue ribbon on the boy and a pink on the girl. French fashion, so you can always tell. Fashion historian Valerie Steele said that a big turning point when it came to coloring gender was when Henry Huntington acquired two 18th century paintings in the 1920s. His purchases were very publicized. The Blue Boy, which depicts a boy dressed in blue, was bought for $728,000, which equates to about $9.5 million, the highest price ever paid for a painting in this era. Pinky depicts a girl wearing pink. From these historical paintings, people started to believe that maybe pink was always a girl's color and blue was always a boy's color, even though that's false. However, there's still evidence some people were still coding blue as a girl's color, such as with the Survey of Color Preferences for Infant Clothing in November 1927. The pink-blue binary is honestly really complicated, and there's a number of factors that contribute to why pink is now associated with girls and blue is now associated with boys. All I can say is that it was just a very gradual process over the 20th century, and there was no one big event that changed the game. In the 60s and 70s, corresponding with sexual liberation and the feminist movement, unisex children's clothing was in higher demand and the pink-blue binary was retired for a bit. But in the 80s, prenatal testing technology was made available, which led to parents becoming more obsessed with their baby's gender. Joe Pauletti, professor emerita of American Studies at the University of Maryland, argues that children of the unisex clothing movement pushed for stronger gender coding for their own children in the late 80s/90s, partially as a reaction against their own upbringings. The bottom line I want to stress is that the way we've gendered clothing has shifted throughout history to reflect current values of the time. We've stopped viewing pants as a boys-only garment because we've moved closer to gender equality and more women have joined the workforce. Similarly, I think that dresses and skirts should lose the girls-only connotation because we've just surpassed that point now. People who hide behind
tradition
don't even make sense because, as I've said, tradition is constantly changing. If you want to stick to tradition so bad, put your asexual cherub in a white gown and do away with these Team Stash versus Team Lash t-shirts. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with purposely wanting to dress more feminine or purposely wanting to dress more masculine. The problem is when people gatekeep femininity or masculinity. To some people, wearing a dress could be wanting to look more feminine, but to other people, dresses are just dresses and they just want to wear a dress because they look nice in a dress and it has nothing to do with gender. One day we're going to look back and be like, wow, I can't believe that in 2020, men were getting criticized for wearing skirts. Just like how we look back now at the 1930s saying, wow, I can't believe that in the 1930s, women were criticized for wearing pants. Obviously, women have always been more oppressed than men, so women being allowed to wear pants has way different implications than men being allowed to wear dresses. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to misogyny because the reason why men can't wear dresses is because it's an insult to look more feminine. Hundreds of years from now, I imagine kids will be looking back at history in the 19th through 20th centuries and just thinking to themselves, why did men stop looking good after the 18th century? There's more money, technology is better, standard of living is higher, and yet they still choose to look like serfs. But seriously, let's not spoil the fun by dictating what people should or shouldn't wear unless what someone chooses to wear is a hate symbol, then yes, we're exiling them. But otherwise, let people have fun. I could honestly keep talking about this subject for ages, but I think this is a good stopping point for now. Thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk, and I'll see you guys next time. I hope you all have a lovely day.